Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
My guest today is Eric Sherman, Head of National Operations at First Capital REIT. Eric has spent over a decade at First Capital working his way through leasing and portfolio management before stepping into his national operations mandate. So he knows a bit about the business from the inside out. Today, he oversees property management and operational delivery across First Capital's national portfolio, 178 properties, more than 21 million square feet, and a team of over 130 people spread across 17 offices coast to coast. That's a big machine to keep running smoothly, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into today. We're going to talk about leadership, operational excellence, building high-performing teams at scale, and what it really means to run one of Canada's largest retail real estate platforms. Eric, great to have you here.
Well, thank you for that intro, and great to be here. Excited for our chat.
Me as well. You've had a rather full-on start to 2026. There's been a baby number 3 has arrived at home, and away from home at work. It's been reviews and conferences and traveling east to west and west to east. You've had a busy time.
Yes. It's been a Q1 for the books, both personally and professionally, but wouldn't have it any other way. It's been a really exciting time, and now we got three little girls under 4 years old. So hands are full juggling that, but also have hands full here at First Capital, and a lot of exciting things on the go.
Oh, big congrats. So I wanted to kick off with leading a national platform. So you oversee operations across a very large national portfolio, and you've got a large national team. When you're responsible for something at scale, how do you think about leadership differently?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and something that changes depending on your team size or your role. And so, I went from managing a team in a site office, local team where you know everybody, to now managing a large team across multiple offices where you don't get to interact with everybody on a day-to-day basis. So I think that in this capacity, leading through leaders is really important. So ensuring that, the regional or market leaders that are running their own offices or regions or markets are clear and aligned on how to execute with their teams. So that means that, you have to put a lot of trust into these leaders to be able to understand what you are trying to get at and how to bring that forward to their groups. And I would say I look at it as a very high level facilitation where everyone has their role, everyone has their title, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. It's just how do you execute within the role that you're sitting in. And so for me, I have the benefit of looking at the national portfolio as a whole. And so some of our market leaders or team members across the country, they are solely focused on a particular portfolio or property. And so it's up to me to kind of bridge the gap between the executive leaders, the vision for the organization, prioritization across the national portfolio, and then distill that down to the teams to make sure that they understand where I'm coming from and where we're coming from. And a lot of that has to do with transparency and just making sure that the directives are not just, this is what we want to do. It's, this is why we're thinking about, this is how we're thinking about things. This is why we're thinking about things this way or that way. And I think that to be able to lead through leaders and then facilitate from a high level based on the context of your role is how I would view leadership, across a scale like this.
Yeah. I mean, when you start with facilitation, it expands into collaboration, and that then leads to engagement, right? So that managing up and that managing down and being that place in between. What are some of the signals that tell you that operations are working well across the platform?
So we have implemented a really strong what we call accountability agreements, and I'll touch on that sort of throughout this podcast a little bit. But I think that it's become a very important part of how we operate. And if you have metrics that people are measured on that drive performance, you end up getting results that align with what the goals are. So, for us in operations, when we're talking about, operating well across a platform, we're talking about cost control, contract management, collaboration with other departments. If we want to get more specific, you're talking about, improving occupancy, high occupancy, low accounts receivable, NOI growth, miscellaneous revenue growth, strong capital plans. So these are sort of the metrics that drive our business, and when they are positive or growing or improving, that generally and simply means that you're operating well. But the real kind of crux of it is, how do you ensure that the teams are working in that direction? And I think that starts with strong and clear direction and strong and clear
Hmm.
accountability agreements, which we've built.
Great. Yeah, lots of signals. In terms of the culture, and a culture that expands across multiple regions, when teams are spread in different cities, you got different offices, a culture can easily fragment. And how the question here is, how do you approach building and maintaining a consistent culture when you're dealing with a national organization?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges I think that anyone, who's managing a team across the country or multiple regional offices or site offices will deal with, is how do you make sure that the culture at 85 Hannah downtown Liberty Village is the same as, Mount Royal in Calgary, or shops at New West in Vancouver, or Place Vio in Montreal. Every employee's reality of First Capital or their place of work is the office that they go into every single day. And so there are some physical attributes, that you try to keep consistent or try to continuously improve to make sure that there's a bit of a feeling that you get when you walk into a First Capital office. But more so, I think it's about, again, going back to leading through leaders, making sure that the leaders in those offices are believing in the same things that you're believing in, that are driving that culture. But a big part of it too is being present. For our executive team and our senior leadership team to visit the offices, to meet the teams, to understand, who they are, where they're coming from, and to build that culture of transparency where team members are feel empowered and safe to share their thoughts, opinions, and feedback, so that we can implement certain changes where possible, or at least provide transparent feedback as to why we can't make a certain change. But
Mhm.
when people feel like they're part of something, that their feedback is heard, that they have the ability to provide that feedback, I think that plays a big role in that. And then I would say, as a whole, in terms of the type of culture that we are trying to build, and this is how I think about, a sort of a fundamental piece of that trickles down into a good team culture, is a culture where performance and passion comes from a desire to contribute alongside hardworking and high performing teams. So it's this feeling that everybody around me is passionate. Everybody around me wants to do, you know, great work. So I want to be a part of that. I want to do great work too, as opposed to driving performance through fear or threats, or, if you don't do this way, you're going to get in trouble, or you're going to, be reprimanded in some capacity, because that also sometimes can drive
Mm.
performance, but that does not drive culture. So
Mm.
if there's this feeling where there's overall positivity, overall a desire to contribute to a team that is high performing, that translates into a very strong culture. So that's really what we're
Mm.
trying to build across the country.
Yeah, it sounds like celebrating the wins and learning collectively from losses. No winning, no losing, just winning and learning. And also that presence piece. And you mentioned about the contribution and just the simple fact that you are, or other leaders are getting on the plane, crossing borders, being present, being at site. They start to feel that visibility of how head office is working and thinking and operating. And it all starts to translate and it becomes kind of one language.
Yes, for sure. And I also think that, when it comes to leadership, back to your first question, but also into culture, a big part of that is also rolling up your sleeves and doing hard work beside the teams and
Yeah.
shoulder to shoulder with them, so that they know that if they run into a problem, that's where you come in, right? That's where your leader comes in and runs towards that problem and is there to support and provide that comfort to say, I'm here with you, I can get this done alongside you. And then when you achieve it together, you gain that respect.
Yeah.
And it also helps translate into, this, let's say, departure from the conventional hierarchical structure of a corporate organization where you can only speak to your superior and your superior is not going to get into the weeds on certain things. It's really about how do we tackle problems together, how do we help drive the business. And so I think that's a huge part of what being a strong leader is: being humble, working alongside your team, and showing them that you're there to support, and nothing's too big or small, whether you're meeting with a tenant, whether you're meeting with a contractor. uh, it doesn't really matter. It's just whatever's needed in that moment to be able to work on that alongside your team. That helps with leadership, and it helps with driving that culture that I talked
Definitely.
about.
Yeah, definitely. It really helps to break down any barriers. Now, talking about barriers, ensuring that like values and expectations translate into day-to-day behaviors. How do you go about ensuring that?
Yeah, so this is also an important one, and a difficult one, right? It's one thing to convey the values and expectations to the team, but how do you actually, measure day-to-day behaviors, or understand that that is translating into day-to-day behaviors? But I think that that comes with setting very clear expectations to both leaders within those markets and regions, and their teams, their employees, and tying day-to-day behaviors to growth paths. I think, like, clearly delineating roles, clearly creating paths for people who want to be on a path, which is not everybody. But if you say what's the difference between a assistant property manager and a property manager, you should have a really clear distinction between those. And it may take some day-to-day behavioral changes to get to that property manager level from that assistant property manager level. And so we want to make sure that we're very clearly aligned with our teams and our leaders, that make sure that, you know, performing really well functionally isn't necessarily the only measure to how you grow your career. It's also making sure that these uh, values and expectations are translating into that day-to-day behavior.
Yeah. And then people get clear on, I know what I need to do and what
It's
is
so
expected,
important.
right?
Exactly.
And then on top of that, it's like, I know what my superior is expected to do. If you have that transparency, so now I know what I need to do to be able to step up within this organization as well.
Exactly. And also, if you don't know what you need to do, that you feel comfortable to ask. And we've
Yeah,
had a lot of conversations. We've been fortunate since I took over this role. We've had to make a number of changes, but a part of that was promoting a lot of very deserving people. Probably more promotions internally than we've had in this department ever. And that, helps to empower the teams and helps get people in the right seat, and then helps us delineate roles a little bit better and help people understand what you need to do to grow.
absolutely. Thank you. Let's talk about the relationship between systems, processes, and people. Big shops invest heavily in all three. And you got, operating standards, reporting frameworks, performance metrics, lots of pieces going on. But ultimately, execution comes down to people. How do you think about the relationship between systems and people when you're building out a high performing operations platform?
It's a very good question, and something that we are dealing with, constantly, particularly in operations. Systems are important and technology is important. We need to be able to properly track data, properly track performance, properly keep records because there is turnover or there's changing portfolios. We need to know what's been going on at our properties. And there's also so much pass through between departments. So how is somebody in property accounting or finance going to be able to track a invoice that came from construction on a capex project that runs through operations, right? There needs to be some systems there that help align. But I also think we can't get too caught up in, overdoing these systems or overdoing the technologies. Um, and so I think we have to use our systems smartly to identify gaps and where these gaps can be filled. And if you don't mind, I'm happy to give an example that I was thinking about on a system that we built exactly for this that has proven to be really, really strong.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Um, and so it's called transfer the space. And so we identified that the lease transfer process, which is when a tenant sells their business or transfers their shares in the business to a new company, um, that was a really tedious process for us. We were doing well over 300 transfers a year. That's like almost one a day. Um, and this required a lot of work from leasing and operations and legal. And we were getting these huge physical transfer packages. Tenants were frustrated because it was taking a long time to process, and they're trying to sell their business, but at the same time there was very little value to the landlord. It's not like you're signing up a new tenant at new rents. It's you're
Hmm.
taking this barber shop and he's selling the business to that barber shop on the same lease. So it was a lot of work for not a lot of return or income. So we developed this portal called Transfer the Space where a tenant can log in if they want to sell their business. They have to upload all of the required documents into that portal before it kicks off into the system. So they can't call and say, "Hey, I sent this package to you 3 weeks ago. Where is it?" Little do they know that they didn't provide us with half of the material that they needed to. So this system tracks that and requires them to see, what's required on our end. How do you do it? And then it goes through an internal process of approvals and collaboration, and uh, and it's made everybody's lives so much easier. Um, so this is something where we took a gap in the business or something that was taking a lot of resources and not yielding a lot of return, building a system around it and implementing it. And we've done so very, very effectively. Our tenants like it, our teams like it, and it's just a really good example. I think kudos to our tech team who built it.
Yeah, no, that's great. Congrats. And I'm sure that's just going to overspill into more systems and processes that are going to support as well. And I think it's great to share this with the wider community as well. So, we can all learn together rather than, this is ours.
Exactly.
Let's all learn. I'd like to move on to operational excellence within the asset class. So retail, it's become a lot more complex and more layered in recent years, especially post-COVID. In terms of tenant expectations, we've got mixed-use environments happening, lots of marketing activation. There's just more pressure as well around operational standards. So from your perspective, what defines operational excellence inside of a retail portfolio today?
Yeah, so I think coming from the publicly traded REIT lens, but this translates really across any operating platform in real estate, which is where we are, obviously, uh, is that there are driving metrics that the market looks at, and this is occupancy, FFO growth, NOI growth, as it relates to operational excellence. So what we can control, um, we're looking at recovery models, we're looking at our capital plans. I think that overall, if I look at a portfolio or a market that I think is operating excellently, I'm looking at consistency. So limited variability year over year, either positive or negative. I mean, positive is always great, but if you have a very consistent portfolio that is consistently improving, whether it's fully occupied or almost there, and you're driving NOI growth, your lease renewal rates are strong, um, your capex is well managed and well spaced out in accordance with your recovery models, that's really an excellently managed portfolio. Um, and then also goes hand in hand with obviously the team and the culture around that, and making sure that those who are behind that are doing so for the right reasons and in the right way. But consistency and growth um, ultimately are what I think drives operational excellence.
Now, looking at one business unit in particular, which is property management,
Mhm.
and we've collaborated and worked on some searches within that space. How has property management evolved inside of First Capital?
So that's a very good question. There's been a big evolution, I would say, and not just within First Capital, but across the industry as a whole. First of all, I think things are a lot more scientific. I think that things are a lot more metric driven, certainly at First Capital. We're really looking at property performance, where each department can contribute to that. Um, and I think that a big part of, so there's the technology side, but then there's also the collaboration side. So collaboration not just with other departments, but also with each other and also with our tenants. And I think that, one of the biggest fundamental differences I think is the relationship between a tenant and a landlord, whereas it used to be very black and white, tenant, landlord, pay me your rent, see you later. There needs to be a lot more nurturing involved in the relationship building. We're looking at our tenants as sort of key stakeholders and partners in a lot of ways. We're service providers. So we've recently merged our leasing and operations teams into a team called Real Estate Services. And Real Estate Services is exactly what we're talking about. We're providing services not just to our shareholders, the people who visit, our customers at the site, but also to our tenants. And I think that mentality shift is something that has really evolved, particularly over the past decade, I would say, but even more so over the past 5 years. So there's the technology side, obviously. There's the data side and using real, science behind how we view performance, but also how we view the tenant landlord relationship as a whole and how we work with our other departments to get there.
And obviously, it fits into a bigger picture, as you said, other departments. So, your role is sitting at that intersection of many business units. You got leasing, development, that's talking with construction, that's talking with marketing, accounting, ESG, and the list goes on. So, how do you create alignment across all of those groups so that the organization moves in the same direction?
Yeah, so I would say tangibly, I'll go back to the accountability agreement. And accountability agreement, for reference, is how our team's bonuses are measured. So how well you do on your accountability agreement directly correlates to, the bonus percentage that you get of your eligible bonus. But what we've really tried to do is build out these scorecards that are cross departmental. So, for example, leasing and operations historically butt heads a little bit for various reasons, but one of the ways that they butt heads is through the dichotomy of occupancy and AR. And when you want to retain occupancy, as conventionally a leasing person would want to do, they want to retain occupancy even if a tenant isn't necessarily paying their rent on time, or maybe they've missed a month or two. They're not necessarily ready to go release the space immediately, so they're okay with that AR building a little bit historically. Whereas the operations team want to collect all of the rent and don't care if a tenant's not paying rent, we got to get them out. Occupancy matters, but we got
Hmm.
to collect the rent. So with this accountability agreement, now that we have occupancy and AR are on everybody's,
Hmm.
so you end up driving decisions based on what is best for the organization. And that's ultimately what you have to get to. It's taking all of these individual departments out of their own silo and bringing them up to a bird's eye view and asking them, if you owned this building, what would you do? I don't care if you're in marketing. It's great that you're in development. I understand you may have a metric that you're working towards, but what is best for FCR? And I think if you ultimately think that way, most departments and most employees will end up getting to a very similar, if not the same result or decision. And it's a very good way to align the department. So there's tangible metrics that you can cross pollinate across multiple departments. And when everybody is beholden to that for a dollar value, there's some buy-in. But really it's, this concept and mantra of think as an owner, and what would you do if you owned this building? That really helps take you out of your day to day, take you out of your sort of pigeonhole, and think about things in a much more, you know, tangible,
Yeah.
broader way.
Yeah. Yeah. Bigger picture thinking. And talking about accountability, what have you learned about getting different teams pulling in the same direction?
I think that, when you see teams pulling in the same direction, everybody feels good. Everybody feels supported.
Yeah.
So there's no better feeling, at least to me, than when you execute a project alongside other departments or other people that you respect and care about. And if you can add a piece to it and they can add a piece to it and you end up getting over the line, different people, different departments, different leaders, different employees have different strengths. And if you can bring your strength to the table and collectively execute, it really helps improve that culture. And that's what I mean about, the culture being driven by a desire to contribute to a high performing team. If
Hmm.
you can get there, and it's not just within your department, it's not just, hey, I went off on my own, did this project, great, give me a tap on the back. It's, I helped someone in development get through a significant tenant issue alongside leasing, and we did this together. Really, there's not a better feeling than that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that that really ultimately is what you learn and what you see when teams are pulling in the same direction. You see a lot of positivity.
Yeah, yeah. You see the impact of collective ownership, you see the impact of collective achievements, and ultimately it brings about change.
Yep.
And that leads us into the next question, which is around leading change in a large organization. So, when you introduce change across a national platform, whether it's operational, whether it's technological or cultural, it can be difficult to get traction, get buy in. Often there's some friction. What have you learned about leading change inside of First Capital?
So, I mean, I've learned that it's not easy. First and foremost, it does not happen overnight. You can't just implement a broad change and expect that, even if you have a very good idea of what the end result should and could be, it doesn't necessarily happen on the ground immediately. It really needs to be nurtured. You need champions who buy in and understand and support it. And then you also need the ability to adapt. So you need, like, so implementing a change is one thing, but adapting within that implementation is another thing. If you start getting a lot of feedback that something's not quite working, okay, how do you pivot? How do you adapt? How do you listen to the feedback? um, change is very important in a lot of cases. So you can't abandon it, even if it results initially with a little bit of pushback. But it's really about nurturing. And I think a big part of that, for me at least, has been through FaceTime, right? Through being there, talking it through, how do we implement our new 5-year CapEx strategy? Well, it takes 2 or 3 times or 4 times or 10 times of sort of repeating it, presenting it in different ways through different people, anecdotally on a site tour with a property manager, in a real estate services conference with 60 people there. It doesn't really matter. There's multiple touch points, but yeah, you can't expect that necessarily you're going to snap your fingers and everything's going to change. It is a process. You got to work with the teams. You need your champions. And you also need to understand that some people may not be okay with that change or may not be able to get there, and ultimately that doesn't work for them or the organization. So it's a tall task, but I've been at this now for close to 3 years in this role, and yeah, it's taken this time to implement some of the significant changes that we thought about 3 years ago.
Are you looking for a specialized recruiting partner to connect you with the people who perform in commercial real estate? At Highview, we partner with some of Canada's leading real estate companies. From national landlords, institutional investors, REITs and service providers, to local developers, third parties, and private family businesses. We are passionate about the Canadian real estate industry and enjoy discussing what's happening in the market. We also provide insight and advice on hiring trends, compensation benchmarking, career roadmaps, networking opportunities, and much more. Visit us at highviewpartners.ca or contact us directly to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
Let's step into part two, career journey, and we're going to take a closer look at your perspective. So you've grown your career within First Capital across multiple roles, as mentioned earlier, from leasing to portfolio leadership and now national operations. Take us back through the journey, and what were the pivotal moments that you feel, Eric, have really shaped your path?
Yeah, so I mean, looking back, it's been almost 13 years at First Capital, which it feels like yesterday, how could it be 13 years? But then when I look back at where I was in my life at that point, it feels like forever ago. It's one of those things. I kind of grew up here a little bit in some ways, but yeah, I started in leasing. I was a leasing rep, managing, our GTA West portfolio out in Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, Guelph. Then started moving more into our North York, Scarborough portfolio. That's when I started leasing some of our community malls. I would say that can be step one as to, pivotal moment that shaped my path. Really learning how to work on some of our most challenging assets with some of, you know, really strong personality tenants, learning from these tenants, learning from the process, learning negotiation. I really think leasing is such a great place, at least to start a career. It doesn't necessarily have the, schooling or role or uh, degree that will lead you in that direction, like some of the other departments in our industry. But it throws you right into it from the beginning. You're going out there meeting with the Shoppers Drug Marts of the world, but also the Mon Pa shop in an enclosed mall in Scarborough, and you're negotiating with them. You're learning the business. You're learning the terms of the agreements, and I think it was so valuable that point in my career and understanding what our business was all about. And it really is the driving force of the business. And then from there, I started doing some of our more urban stuff, and had some success early on in the early days of the Yorkville portfolio. Yorkville being the sort of high end luxury district in Toronto, but really in the country. And as I gained some success in the Yorkville portfolio, that kind of allowed me to grow into moving actually to that site office. Another pivotal moment when I talked to the teams across the country, they I can relate to working out of a site office. I was working out of the Yorkville office, site office, 10, 12 people for multiple years during my time at First Capital. Um, and then from there, I started getting much more into operations and overseeing the marketing team, the operations team, and that's when we're talking about portfolio management. I was responsible and for the performance of the portfolio here. So this was a business unit within First Capital's portfolio that I had oversight over. And that really helped drive my business decision making. Okay, out of this leasing pigeonhole, out of this leasing, you know, uh, area and into what are the other cogs on this wheel. And then into this national operations role where you go from managing a team of 10 to 12 people that you're working beside every day in a site office to managing a really broad team across multiple levels across the country in multiple offices. And so that's a whole different skill set, a whole different mentality. And so I would say that's that next step is managing that broader team across a much wider region. So to keep it brief, that's really it's been a really long journey here. It's been a great journey. I really thank First Capital for the opportunity to grow and to pivot and to shift out of departments into departments, and to gain leadership experience. And yeah, it's 13 years later. Here we are.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. Did you anticipate when you joined that you would be with First Capital as long as you have, or is it the pivots and the pivotal moments that have really kept you in the business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I mean, at the time, I was happy to get a job, right? I was, I was happy to get in. I wanted to be in retail. I knew I wanted to be in retail real estate. I had been a summer student at RioCan for a couple summers while I was in school. So, just to get that job was step number one. I don't think I was necessarily looking 13 years down the road. But as I've grown through my career and as the years have gone by, um, I haven't really thought too much about it. It sort of happened quickly. And I think a big part of that, like you said, is the opportunities that I've been given within First Capital to grow and to challenge myself. Something that I always knew was that I wanted to not just focus on one skill set or one department.
Mm,
And so when I was in leasing, I knew that it was important for me to learn the other departments and to learn the construction schedule, see what that schedule looks like with construction, what the costs were, with operations, what in the lease impacts their lives. And so I definitely think that through the years being able to kind of grow across multiple departments has really helped me. But I'm thrilled that I've been here. I don't think you would know better than anyone else. I think today's day and age, people tend to jump a lot more frequently than maybe historically. But I couldn't be happier to have had this tenure here and to have been given the opportunities that I have.
yeah, no, it's impressive. Now, as responsibilities grow, the nature of the job begins to change, and sometimes it can change dramatically. What for you were the biggest shifts that you've experienced as you have moved and transitioned your way up into senior leadership?
Yeah, so I think that when you're in a bit more of a junior role, it's much more task oriented. So it's, in leasing, how many renewals do I have? Let me go knock them off the list. Let me try to, get the best deals I can get. If you're a property administrator, it's, how do I make sure that I'm meeting my deadlines, that I'm collecting my rent, and that I'm collecting my sales reports and my COIs. It's very task oriented and you're focused on what is within your purview of responsibility. As you grow as a leader, you start having to make sure that those tasks are being achieved by others. So delegation is a really important leadership function that is sometimes difficult for people to transition from that task management into that people management. And then on a broader scale, when you're not just managing people tasks through others, you're managing, you know, leaders who are managing tasks through others. It becomes this, ever building jigsaw puzzle. But I would say that a huge part of my day is spent on our people, our teams. When there's well over 100 people, 100 to 200 people in our department at any given time, there's always gonna be changes, there's always gonna be turnover, there's always gonna be, you know, people that are ready to grow, that are, maybe not quite ready to grow, but wanna grow, so there's a lot of puzzle pieces to look at when you're considering, how do we facilitate this culture? How do we facilitate growth? And how do we set up the structure to best perform for the organization? So, a big, big part of my day now, moving into this more senior leadership role, is focusing on people and rather than necessarily tasks.
Yeah, and there's so many skills there to acquire as a leader, right? And I think it becomes, I mean, with the seasons, it obviously changes as well. For at the beginning, it's more trust building, and then you go through change, and it's more about adaptability or the ability to develop others. But when I speak with leaders, I think there are three themes that really come through, and the first is like decision making, like being able to drive progress. And in no particular order. The second that comes to mind is communication, like just
Mhm.
creating alignment, setting clear direction and expectations, aligning those priorities, eliminating any confusion and noise. If people don't understand you, they can't execute, right? And then the
Exactly.
third is EQ, and that is the building trust piece, and that is reading the room. That is managing your own reactions, handling difficult conversations well. And I think this is the difference between uh, a leader people follow versus one that they tolerate, right?
100%. And I think that, those are three really good pillars to focus on. And when you put them together, you end up with a strong leader. Business decision making is a very important one. That was your first pillar there. And I think that, me moving from that leasing and portfolio management role into this operations role may seem kind of unconventional, but I think there was some trust in the ability to make strong business decisions. And that's what I'm really trying to impart on the team is how do we collectively make strong business decisions and how can you be empowered to make strong business decisions? But then you get into, EQ and self-awareness and trying to make sure that you're stepping away from the day to day or the focus that you have on something and understanding what perspective the other individual that you're dealing with may have. um and yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, this is all what ends up putting together a strong leadership and a strong
Hmm.
team.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, great. Moving from transitioning into senior leadership into building, developing future leaders. You lead senior regional leaders and a large operational team across Canada. How do you approach building and developing leaders at First Capital?
Yeah, so it's a big focus, big focus. Like I said before, we've been really careful, but really purposeful about promoting internally here at First Capital, and we've done so significantly in a significant way within our operations team. So, like we said before, creating clear, delineated roles. So what's the difference between an APM, a PM, an SPM, and a GM? In a lot of ways, there's a lot of similarities between these roles, but how do you clearly define each one so that you can set clear expectations on your team members and help them get to that next level and they understand what they need to do to get there? It's not just tenure. It's not I've been here for 10 years, so I should be a senior property manager instead of a property manager. It's what areas of responsibility are different between those two roles. And then I think that developing leaders is very important. Our people and culture team has put a big focus on this. I mean, right now we're running a leadership multi functional leadership program, 6 sessions with a leadership coach with our operations senior leadership, so GMs, directors, and VPs are going through this 6 session leadership training, and it's something that we continue to work on. And so there's the internal side, but there's also some external resources that we use and that we should use to help develop our strong performers, so that they can bring those tools and use them in the day to day.
Yeah, expand the tool belt. And when we look at emerging leaders, what qualities are you looking for?
I would say passion and engagement outside of the four walls of your current role. I think that's so important. I mean, we're on the road a fair amount, visiting our properties with all kinds of different levels and departments, and you really get a sense when somebody starts asking questions and trying to dive into, why are we so focused on AR and how do we collect and recovery models and CAM and tax rates and the complicated things that, go into making strong business decisions or making you better at your job. And I think that to be a strong leader, you need to have that curiosity and also to help, work on yourself to understand what your counterparts are doing across departments. It's not enough to be a really strong leasing person. You need to know what construction is doing. You need to know what makes them tick. It's not enough to be a strong project manager in construction. You need to understand what the tenant is thinking and why they're asking for certain things so that you can go back and, give your value engineering proposition. Um, so people that are passionate about the business, not just about their role or about their department or about their metrics. It's passionate about the business. And if you are passionate about the business and you have that strong EQ, right? You work well with people, you can understand people, you can relate, you're charismatic. That combination, I think, is something that we look for to identify our leaders moving forward.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing that ownership mindset is coming through for me as you
Yeah,
speak, right? Like taking responsibility without being asked, right? Stepping into problems, not away from them, right? I think that's a
exactly.
real clear early indicator of someone's leadership potential. And then you tie that up with, that's really talking about, I'll take it on, And
Yep.
then the next part as a leader, working with an emerging leader, is the coachability. Like, are they thinking, I can get better at this? Are they open to feedback? Are they aware that they don't have all the answers? Are they looking to actively improve upon and, better their trajectory, not just their current state? And then the last part, I think, is about like action. Like, how am I going to move this forward? How do I take initiative? How do I move things forward without waiting for someone above to say, you should move in this direction or put your finger on the pulse over here? And so I think that potential shows up in that momentum. How's that speaking to you?
100%. And I think, to me, it's kind of touching on your point about being proactive and diving into a problem, getting something done. As a leader, if I ask a team member, "Hey, would you mind looking into this for me? It's going to help drive a decision." And if they come back and say, "Hey, I already did this," you're like, wow, this is
Yeah,
somebody that gets it,
they
right?
get it. Yeah.
And I've had the luxury of working with these types of people who have gone on to do amazing things, whether at First Capital or outside, um, who really had that impact, right? It's
Hmm.
let's go work on this. Oh, I've already done that. Um, then you're working in tandem, you're working aligned, you can sort of read each other's minds. That's when you're in a really healthy spot.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Looking at the evolution of retail, we touched on this earlier. It's going through big change, big shifts. E-commerce, evolving consumer behavior, and growing importance on mixed-use communities. That's been massive in recent years. How have you seen the industry evolve during your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been a significant evolution. You know, there's 2 or 3 segments, of our industry. There's, First Capital is very focused on retail. So, if I focus on retail, there I think there's been a bit of a shift in dynamics over the past decade, particularly relating to supply. And I think that the major tenants are understanding now that there is not a lot of new supply coming to market, and that a lot of these long-term leases with multiple options are now kind of on the horizon of coming to term. And so there's not a lot of replacement opportunity in new retail. So I think over the past, let's say 20 years ago, there was a lot of greenfield development sites, particularly in the suburban GTA. A lot of new shopping centers, not malls, but grocery anchored shopping centers. That's really really slowed. So I think that that's benefited the landlord in a lot of ways, and particularly companies like First Capital. That's why you've seen First Capital's results, continue to improve, and our metrics, have been really strong, is because of that factor. And I think identifying that factor and then figuring out how to operate within it, working with our key tenants fairly, but also taking advantage where we can of that type of opportunity of limited supply on the market. That's where I think there's been a bit of a shift here. And I think overall, we talked about technology a little bit, but from when I started in leasing 13 years ago, the industry has gotten a lot more scientific. It's gotten a lot more metric based. It's gotten a lot more uh, reliant on data, and not necessarily reliant on data, but it uses data a lot more effectively. And so, I think that that has really helped drive performance and drive businesses. And I think companies like First Capital is performing well, but our major tenants, the grocery stores, the pharmacies, the quick service food, fitness centers, are also performing really well. So when you get that combined, um, it's a really
Hmm.
good recipe.
It is. It's a good cocktail. You mentioned a few of the trends there. So obviously, supply constraint, and that means strong leasing fundamentals, um, particularly when supply is tight, drives value. The part that I wanted to touch on with you is this evolution of retail, and this is happening more in the enclosed mall environment around experience and mixed use integration, and how it's shifting from transactional to experiential and community driven, particularly in malls and shopping centers. Um, how are you reacting to that, and what is First Capital doing in that regard?
Yeah, so we don't have a ton of enclosed malls. Our malls that we do own are shopping center or shopping centers that have generally enclosed portions, are generally community based. And so yes, we're trying to bring in a lot of services, and we're trying to understand the communities that we are operating in. And so we put together, a formula, but that formula may be made up of different components depending on the neighborhood that we're in. But as it relates to enclosed centers, we have a couple of really exciting projects that are actually demalling, so removing the mall portion and and kind of redeveloping in a sense these properties into more conventional um, First Capital grocery anchored shopping center sites very successfully. So we're looking at that, but then I'll also say things like properties like Yorkville, which obviously I have a lot of experience with, and is my baby in a lot of ways. Um, we really try to integrate with the community. We really try to understand what the needs are. We've had multiple different projects. So we've had redevelopment projects, we've had new builds. We now have this mixed use, all luxury condo being built in the neighborhood. We own the Hazelton Hotel at a point. So it's really understanding, what parts make up, the fabric of a community. And if you want to be successful, you got to understand who that community is and what makes them tick.
Yeah.
And Yeah, I think that I do think though in a lot of ways we're getting back to the fundamentals. We're getting back to that core grocery anchored, fundamental retail recipe that's been so successful for us historically.
Yeah, good to hear. Yeah, retail's no longer just about stores, is it? It's about creating destinations, so to speak.
Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, some of our peers are doing these huge mixed use projects, which are incredibly exciting, but you do need that mass, right? You need the people there to live, work, play. And how do you service these people? And there's been some great examples of that,
Yeah.
recently. So.
Yeah, definitely. And that segues perfectly into my next question, which is about what is exciting you about what you're seeing more broadly speaking in the industry.
I mean, I'm seeing a lot of positivity. I mean, we're in an uncertain time. It has been, for a number of years now, economic period of uncertainty, but there's a lot of optimism in retail, and particularly in grocery anchored retail. It's all of a sudden become kind of the darling of the retail industry, and performance is aligned with that. I'm excited for the new generation of leaders that are coming in. I'm excited for the new technologies that are coming in and how we can really smartly and purposefully adapt uh, within this environment. And yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see what's next in the future here. But overall, I do think real estate is such a fundamental part of everybody's life, whether you like it or not. You're living somewhere generally, or traveling somewhere, you're shopping somewhere, you're eating somewhere, you're entertaining yourself somewhere, you're working somewhere.
Yeah.
And all of that comes back to brick and mortar. And so, how that brick and mortar evolves and how these really smart, creative people are working in the background to make that happen, and how that evolves is really exciting, and excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, modern grocery anchor centers are definitely, performing well, and it's needs based, right? People have to go. It's traffic driving. It supports the whole center, so to speak, of the community, and it's resilient. It's less disrupted by e-commerce like some of the bigger properties out there. I'd love to talk about innovation. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the opportunities that you see for innovation and technology in real estate operations, so to speak?
Yeah, so I think that there's all kinds of things that we're looking at. I mean, you get a new AI, organization reaching out at any given day. So I think we have to be very careful. I think we have to really look at, okay, what are maybe some of the biggest organizations in the world implementing or looking at? As First Capital, we're still, we're Canadian REIT. There's a lot bigger fish out there. So understanding what they're looking at and understanding how that might impact our business. But I do think there are a lot of opportunities within technology. We're talking about things like predictive capex, right? So predictive construction maintenance programs. We're talking about we're working on a new CMMS platform, so computerized maintenance management software. We're developing things like transfer the space. Um, Things are becoming a lot more digital. So even things that now I would say our biggest priorities are procurement. How do we nationalize and streamline procurement services? How do we build out stronger capex plans that are predictive in nature that we can execute on? Um, and then how do we, manage our teams in a more effective way to help drive that culture that we were talking about? So definitely a lot of noise in the technology world right now. Um, Real estate historically has been a bit of a slower adapter to it, but we're keeping our eyes open. Our IT team is all over it, and yeah, we're kind of we're looking at what we can do to help drive the business.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities, a lot of possibilities. Watch this space.
Exactly.
Okay, advice for future leaders. That's uh, that's where we're going to hang our hat today and wrap up the podcast. It's been an awesome conversation. So thank you so much for being with us. For someone earlier in their career, Eric, perhaps in leasing, perhaps they're in property management or development, or in another area of a real estate company, owner operator, service provider, who wants to grow into leadership, what advice do you have?
So I'm going to go on the same train as sort of the theme of this conversation in a lot of ways, which is the advice that I give future leaders is to learn as much as they can about other departments that they work with. So either you're already in an organization like a First Capital, right? And fortunate to be there in a lot of ways, and you're in leasing or you're in construction, you're in development, you're in investments, you're in, operations, understanding what other departments are doing, what drives them, what makes them tick, that is so important if you want to be a future leader in any organization. Any leader in any of these departments are cross pollinating with each other constantly. So the more you understand about what they're doing, the better, you'll be set up for, leadership in the future. And then I would also say, you know, continue. This was my first interview, or maybe it was my final interview with First Capital, when I think they knew that I was going to get the job, and I was an entry level leasing rep. And the VP at the time, who was the last one to see me, he said, "Remember to be humble. You're being given a great opportunity to work at a great organization. Remember to stay humble." And I think that that's so important. You get a lot of young people coming into the industry or into the workforce, and they have big expectations on compensation, on roles, on growth trajectory. I think you need to be able to sort of use humility, understand what you don't know, and maybe understand that you don't know everything, and be open to learning, be open to collaborating, learn the market, learn other departments, and then you're well on your way.
Yeah, great advice. How the business really operates beyond your role, right? And you mentioned a number of the different business units, like what actually drives value, how decisions are being made at a senior level. The best people, they don't just do their job, right? They understand the entire ecosystem of what is going on. And you and I have been in this industry a while, obviously on the inside and me on the perimeter. But real estate is a relationship driven industry. We say that so often on this podcast, how you build trust, how you follow through, and how you communicate professionally. Your reputation compounds over time, right? And this industry is smaller than people think. Your name
100%.
definitely carries weight.
Well, and that leads to, I guess, one more point I'll make, and don't tell too many people this point, okay? It's a big one, and it's sometimes very
No
difficult,
one's
but
listening, Eric.
exactly, exactly.
Just you and me.
Treat people with respect.
Hmm.
As revolutionary as that might sound, it's simple. Treat people with respect, treat people fairly. That will go a long way. That goes exactly to what you were talking about, building your reputation. The industry is small. That will go for most industries. Treat people with respect. Write a good email. These are simple things that, if you're doing those things, you're ahead of 90+% of your peers. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, simple advice, back to the basics, treat people
Back to the
respectfully.
basics.
Yeah.
Eric, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure chatting. And look forward to the next conversation.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.